he was like a shut-in. That's all he dealt with, you know, a monk. And that, you know, during the Latin part, the so-called Latin part of our history, when we were up there in Europe, you had what's the word I'm looking for? You had many individuals who their job was to be like a monk. In other words, to serve the church. They would totally dedicate themselves to learning the law, the statutes, and the commandments, thereby making themselves a shut-in, example given a monk. And they lived in something called a monastery. And they had something called monastic orders. All right, so they were very instrumental in dealing with religion, which means to bind. So, you know, that word monastic is very close to the word religion, because like I said, the monks, they binded themselves to their cause, which was to learn the laws, the statutes, the commandments. So they were the personification, the monks, of religion. All right, they were the personification of that word religion. Anyway, reading on, it says the medieval usage alternates with order in designated bonded communities. I gave you an example of that: bonded communities, the monastery, the monks, like those of the monastic orders. We hear of the religion of the Golden Fleece, a knight of the religion of Aves. So they're just giving an example here, but we're not talking about the Golden Fleece or any of that. We're talking about religion in the sense of the word, how it relates to us that are doing this work. So we're going to take a look at the next source that I have, and let's see what we find out. This was from a Yahoo blog that I came across, and evidently that word religion is very popular in discussions, what the word actually means. You know, it provokes thought. Most people don't think about the word. They just, you know, most people are parrots anyway. You know, we did that lesson at Elder Tar did that lesson at Yale, and he had some of us over there at Yale, and we saw the statues of, you know, the parrot and the monkey and the dragon, which really represents, etched in stone on the Yale campus, which really represents levels of intelligence. Now, most people are on the nature of a monkey and a parrot, even among the camps, even among the Israelite camps. Most of these guys are just monkeys and parrots. Very few are on the levels of serpents and dragons, which the difference between us, you know, an owl and a dragon, which pretty much on the same level, but an owl can see things in the dark because it has a special oil behind its eyes that illuminates its eyes, and it's able to see things in the dark. So that's why by the elites the owl was worshipped, and the owl was said to be wise. But along with the owl was the dragon or the serpent, which was equally said to be wise. The difference between the owl and the dragon is the dragon is a lot more cruel than the owl. But that's for another lesson for another time. But anyways, if we go back to this our topic at hand, which is religion, it says, does the word religion really come from the Latin word religare, which means to bind or to blind? It should say bind. The word religion comes from the Latin word religio or religo, which has a meaning influenced by the verb religare, to bind. And that's the general consensus among the word from the sources that I have found. The general consensus is that the word literally means to bind, in the sense of place an obligation. Again, if you have an obligation, you are bounded to that obligation. The World Book Dictionary defines obligation as duty. Again, duty, obligation, bind. If you're binded to something, it is your duty to do that thing. The World Book Dictionary defines obligation as duty, which in turn is defined as a thing which a person ought to do, a thing which is right to do. So if somebody were to come up now and ask you, brothers, well, what's your religion? What is my religion? The laws, statutes, and commandments of the Heavenly Father. The fact that I'm out here on the streets teaching, that is my religion. That is what binds me to the Heavenly Father and His Son. That is my duty. That is my obligation. That's how you would answer that. You would answer that now because now you know what the word religion truly means, the etymology of the word. See how when you look up words, how things come into proper perspective? So let's take a look at the next source that I have. In web surfing, I came across this next source, the Jewish Daily Forward. Now, obviously, this is written by a so-called Jew, but it does raise a good point, so it'll be included in this lesson. It's dated March 25th, 2007. Obviously, there was a discourse on the word religion. And again, I've cropped it to get right to the point. Brad Rappaport from Brooklyn writes, Rappaport, you know that's a so-called Jew. Recently, I read in my dictionary that the origin of the word religion lies in the Latin word ligere, to bind. I found this interesting, not only because of the tradition of laying tefillin. Now, tefillin, that is a straight up device that binds. Here's an example of tefillin. It's also called a tying tefillin. Now in the scriptures you know it as phylacteries. See, this is part of the law, that you're supposed to bind yourself with these ties that really represent the law, statutes, and commandments of the Heavenly Father. So these morons, like that big brute, that big gorilla from Chicago, that the Chicago brothers dealt with, if he was really truly about the law, he was making a big deal about the fringes. Well, where was his phylactery? He didn't have no phylacteries on, if he's all about the law. You see, that's what I mean about these guys. They're nothing but hypocrites. And they don't know, even further than being a hypocrite, they're just dumb. They don't know anything. That moron, that monkey that was on the mic talking about, yeah, do you have your fringes? Where's your fringes, bro? Well, I have a question for you. Where's your phylacteries? Where's your tying tefillin? Which is what they call it, the tying tefillin. Here's another example. This went around your head and between your eyes. It's also known as a frontlet. And these, as you see, the so-called Jew has on, you see he has it bound around his arm. Remember the word religion, to bind. Now in this little square here was supposed to be the, the laws, copy of the laws written inside of the box there. There it is again. Now I'm going to do a little bit more research on it. I'm not sure if it goes back to Saturn, that black cube, which the so-called Muslims worship, which they call the Kaaba stone. I'm not sure about that, but I do know that you have something called phylacteries, and it was bound around different parts of the body, the head, between the eyes, as well as the arm. But anyway, if we go back to this, go back to what Rappaport was saying. Let's see if we bring that up here. The tradition of the laying tefillin, so now you know what that is. But also because of the story of the binding of Isaac, we make reference to how Isaac was bound and Abraham was going to sacrifice him. Could it be, I reasoned, that Abraham is the founder of biblical faith because he sets a model that is binding for our own conduct, i.e. being willing to sacrifice our own ambitions? Possible, could be, sounds plausible. I mean, it's not etched in stone, but You know, Abraham was a model for faith. As a matter of fact, Abraham, before he got the name Abraham, his name was Abram. And the reason why he got that name Abraham, his name being Abram changed to Abraham, was because of his great faith, which he had even before he was keeping the law. I mean, the man wasn't even circumcised, and the Lord justified him by faith. So he was a good model for faith. Reading on, it says, for what is ordained by the Heavenly Father. However, I then found on the internet that this origin of the word religion is in dispute. Does that mean that all my fine sentiments about the word's significance are worthless? Nothing is worthless if something can be learned from it. Let's see what can be learned from Rappaport's speculations. The etymology of religion. You see the discussions that these so-called Jews have. What are you so-called Negroes? What the hell are you discussing? How much your pair of Air Jordans cost? Or whatever they're wearing today. Whatever basketball moron they're worshiping today. This is the discussions that the so-called Jews are having. You know? And they really believe that they're us. That's the crazy thing about it. It is, we should be discussing things like that because we're the real people. And you have these rats, the so-called Jews, discussing what we ought to be discussing. Anyway, the etymology of religion is indeed disputed. This is not, of course, the case when it comes to English, which clearly inherited the word from the Latin religio. Rather, it applies to Latin itself. Like I said, the word came out of the Latin era, in which it is not clear what the component parts of the noun religio are or mean. The ancient Romans disagreed about this. Cicero, for example, and we learned about Cicero and his take on it. For example, thought that religio derived from the verb religere in its sense to read, meaning read, or go over a text. Religion being a body of custom and law that demands study and transmission. Exactly, the law, meaning the laws of statutes and commandments of the Heavenly Father, it does demand study and transmission. That's why you had something called a monastery back then, which that is what the monks were learning about. As a matter of fact, like Elder Tar mentioned at the Yale University, you had something called a college. The colleges were set up specifically to teach the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Bible, of the scriptures. But now today you have colleges and they're set up, really they're just a whorehouse. You know, you got binge drinking, you got wild sex and all that. You know, even so much so that there was a movie called Animal House, which was basically, it exuded the wild life of a college campus. The movie Animal House starring John Belushi. But when colleges was first started, they were started to teach the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Heavenly Father. Anyway, reading on, it says, on the other hand, the Christian writer Lactantius, writing in the early 4th century, opted for religere, a verb meaning to fasten or bind. So it's a wrap on this word religion. That's what it means. It means to fasten or bind. And we have the, actual sense of the word in the phylacteries or the frontlets. They literally binded you. And there was a copy of the law kept in those boxes. And it was to remind you of the laws, statutes, and commandments, as well as the fringes. The fringes was only, so that big gorilla from Chicago, he only got it half right. The fringes are to remind you of the laws, statutes, and commandments, but so are the frontlets, and so are the phylacteries, which are also known as the Tayin Tefillin. See? So you guys that's talking about the law this and the law that, ask yourselves why you don't have your Tayin Tefillin or your frontlets. Reading on, it says, On the other hand, the Christian writer